theology nerds. This is Tripp, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. And returning to the podcast is my friend Barry Taylor. That is right. Rock and roll guru extraordinaire, radical theologian, and long time friend of the pod. And in this conversation, we talk about radical theology. We talk about theology's relationship to culture, the changing nature of religion and spirituality. What did we learn coming in and out of COVID, and a host of other topics. And then out of nowhere, there's a surprise visitation, an eschatological rupture, an arrival of a third conversation partner. But you'll see in the interview. Now, before we jump in, I want to tell y'all two things. Number one, what is it, Tripp? Well. Theology Beer Camp tickets are available and on sale. We're going to be in Denver, Colorado, October 17th and 19th, and there's going to be tons of fun, like the kind of fun you have with people like Ilya Dilio, John Tatamanel, Brian McLaren, Diana Butler-Bass, Jorg, Rieger, Grace G. Sun Kim, Leah Robinson. It's going to be exciting. Bible for Normal People, You Have Permission, The New Evangelicals, Rev Covery. There's going to be 20 plus theologians, 20 plus God pods, and all the crafty, beverage, nerdy excitement you can handle. So head over to theologybeer.camp. Grab your ticket now before the early bird tickets and prices go up and such. And last thing is I want to tell you something. We've had a number of people recently join the Homebrewed community. They went to homebrewedcommunity.com. They donate each month, help make all sorts of things possible. And I've hinted before that we've had something in the works. And oh my, we're getting very near to the revelation of a project I've been working on for like a year and a half. And if you want to already be in the community when something crazy, wild, and new launches, and it's so zesty that you're like, oh, I can't wait to have access to all of this, then go ahead and go to homebrewedcommunity.com, and you'll be able to lock right in your membership. Be the first to find out, test out, and such. It's going to be wild. And you help make this podcast and all the classes and everything we do available for the people. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and here's Barry. Right. Hello, everyone. This is Tripp, and returning to the podcast is someone every time we're together I know is cooler than me, Barry Taylor. And
I don't know. I think your cool factor raises every time we talk.
What exactly? How have I achieved that?
Well, probably by talking to me, but
Okay.
No. I don't know. Well, your glasses are hipper than they were before.
Well, one of the things that happens with small children that use you as a jungle gym is they occasionally break them. And once they do, you then decide, well, I guess I should spend money to get new glasses.
Yeah. This is it.
And, that all fashion advice outside of baggy jeans with cargo pockets really came from you. So now, for those that aren't going back immediately to listen to the other 20 hours of us recorded on the internet talking, one of the questions that I've actually been thinking about a lot recently is because I've been editing large amounts of these interviews for the story of the emerging church movement, and in processing that history is a shift that took place in a lot of the kind of Western conversation around church, culture, theology, kind of between 2018 and 2016, there is this kind of increasing awareness that the concept of religion that people thought they were kind of updating, reorienting, morphing, wasn't finding traction in the historic religious institutions where they would change, and wasn't landing in the way you would hope if you were the one pioneering it, right, in the kind of non-religious cultural space. And so as a kind of cultural philosopher, a radical theologian, I'd love for you to kind of reflect on that time in transition and what are the elements or variables that you think are most important to kind of pay attention to in that changing religious, spiritual space and culture?
Well, firstly, I think that lack of traction predates the awareness by at least a decade. I think it took a while for people to sort of get beyond what they believed they were accomplishing, to see that what actually they were trying to do wasn't really working and probably wasn't going to work. I mean, for me, that was part of my sort of initial explorations around the time of the whole emerging church thing, was really part of my own sort of desire to try and work out what the disconnects were between the way the sort of church's self-understanding of its mission or place in society, and how it could in some way gain traction, regain traction, redefine itself, reconfigure itself. And I think the problem was that, and the problem remains, is that generally the shift is, I think it's two things. One, it's a change, a slight change of form, and a broader social inclusion, but a fairly weak theological support for that social inclusion. So, it's like people want to be more inclusive or more expansive in who they truly accept into the community, if you like. So for a lot of people, that meant embracing, people with alternate sexual orientation and stuff like that. But it seldom resulted in serious theological rethink. It was usually an adjustment on a spectrum, but maintaining essentially largely, I think, arguably fairly static traditional conceptions about God and about religion in general, whether that was, conservative or liberal. And consequently, I think the gap sort of grew, because I think in the culture, it's very interesting. And I said this I said this or observed this years ago when I first sort of realized that a lot of my non-churchy friends who were declared by the church to be, fully secular or not spiritual and stuff like that, were actually very interested in something. But how it was framed within Christianity was not the something that they were seeking. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it really does extend to very significant things like, or such as conceptions of the nature of the divine, God and those kind of conversations. I think it's that big of an issue. And consequently, that's why the traction hasn't taken, because really there's been a little bit that for a lot of people, there was futzing around that area, so a shift towards a more, away from a kind of, I don't know, Calvinistic, these are the 5 characteristics of God kind of thing, to a more ethereal, probably mystical end of things. But still at the end of the day, largely a conception of this omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient being with agency in the world. And I think therein lies the problem for a lot of people. That was a short answer, wasn't it?
No. There are so many things there to pick up. One of them, I wonder what role you think the conflict from those trying to kind of explore creatively beyond the boundaries of their inherited faith, the kind of conflict they have with their kind of natal traditions, if that's one of the elements. Because, this was something I remember me and you and Phyllis Tickle having a fun conversation about when we had to, oddly enough, if this isn't revealing, walk a whole 30 yards off campus at Fuller to go in the UCC church so that we could have beer that I made for her on her last book tour for us to talk. And y'all had this real fun conversation that, we were editing a few clips out of different stuff for the podcast. And in it, she had previously answered a question around, she goes, well, there are the big questions for emergence, like authority, the human being, and sex and gender was connected to it. And also, like, how is God up to anything? Atonement question.
Yeah.
And something you raised that I've been dwelling on is, even in those emergent contexts, because the support structure and the place where the people that are trying to re-engage the Christian tradition often came out of Protestantism, the debate around where does the authority come from to, like, call people into a community and stuff was still grounded in the Protestant debates and the Protestant assumptions about Scripture. And that gap you were talking about that grew as more and more people are kind of culturally have to commute to have an exegetical conversation and pick up the nuance. They just feel inherently alienated from the tradition, as opposed to, say, like late 90s, early 2000s, especially in more religious contexts. You're like, oh, we argue about the text like rabbis. Oh, God's not an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that, and therein lies the challenge with the sort of structure of institutional Christianity is the model itself that dominates is a model that was formed in a particular time that addressed life in a certain way, and it became sort of dogmatized itself and crystallized into a particular way of understanding. And you see this even in things like, Anglican churches and stuff like that. The whole notion of a parish church is that the parish church was your church. It wasn't a question of, oh, I like the preacher there, or I don't like the preacher there, or that's where you went. And if you moved, you sort of had to send a letter, and let everybody know that you were shifting. And it was usually because you were moving out of the neighborhood, and naturally then you'd move to another parish. But that kind of went the way of many things, even in the 60s when preference and choice began to dominate the cultural landscape.
Well, and cars. Right. I remember I remember when we were teaching the ecclesiology class together. Yeah. And we were talking about this point, and then you go, well, when you don't have to ride a horse to switch pastors.
one of my better lines. But it's true. But I also think then that it's a very interesting thing that, a lot of people go, oh, people are only sort of Christians on Sunday morning or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And those sort of old tropey lines. But I think you're right. For a lot of people, the significant conversations that they have and that they want to have quite often take place outside of what is supposedly the sacred ground on which perhaps those conversations you might think would actually be the spot where they could take place, because permission isn't granted to sort of question the inherently, the inherited notions, whatever they might be to that particular community. So this can only send people into a greater sense of disconnect. And then you add to all of that the various ways that people tend to their lives now, whether, people in 12-step or people in therapy or psychoanalysis and stuff like that, places where people actually are getting down to some of the real issues that they're concerned about or struggling about, you can kind of see where that gap kind of hardens and widens and almost becomes too big to cross at times for a lot of people, or they kind of adopt a more kind of ritualistic approach to the practice of their religion. So they go to church for the going, but they still save their conversations and their thoughts life for elsewhere, where they feel safer or secure or freer to talk about things without sort of having to defend asking the question.
When saying that made me think of a conversation I had it was somewhere in January, and I was speaking at a gathering of kind of regional ministers, and someone else had presented a lot of like the sociological data on the change of religion, and one of the more conservative ministers in a mainline denomination, he was very upset, about this.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, I'm not saying people shouldn't have a library card and be a member at the art museum. I'm just saying, the church still has to do the work of liturgy." And one of the 80-plus-year-old spunky early female, clergy leaders looks up and goes, "Well, what happens if when the church does the work of the liturgy, it doesn't have a goddamn thing to say about why they were moved in the art museum or even acknowledge the fact they were reading books?" And I think that when I like seeing that, underneath it, he's even recognizing that there are genuine needs, both of like wrestling with things in the aesthetic, or you could think of people that love theater or the film or all these different kind of places in culture where the questions that humans have wrestled with for a long time, and then the ones that are connected to the particular anxieties of our times, like, do they even find voice in the kind of traditional religious space? And when they don't, well, what's the remainder of the gathering?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the issues around this go in lots of different directions, and many factors contribute to that. I mean, if you think about it in the 20th century. I mean, take a place like Fuller, for instance, in Pasadena, a seminary founded by a radio evangelist who had national fame as a preacher. So it was quite possible for people to sort of turn on a radio and listen to Charles Fuller and not go to church, perhaps, or add to their sort of, spiritual intake with that. And you sort of go through the 20th century and you see the way in which religion embraced technology. And as it embraced technology, a kind of dispersal of the community was actually facilitated by those technologies, because they allowed people to experience things that before they'd only been able to experience within a particular room or a particular space. And quite often, the people who were on those early sort of broadcast mechanisms sometimes had, if not better, sometimes more resonantly popular things to say. And then, and then you think about the onset of, recordings and, from cassette tapes, CDs, to now to digitality. And the whole idea of, online church and AI church and all of those various factors, places where people can have a little bit of anonymity, when especially, which is important if they're wrestling with theological issues they don't feel safe in a particularly seen environment to do. We shouldn't be surprised really, but people are, which I find surprising.
Well, do you think part of it there is that dynamic you got at with technology, that human beings have, well, since we got fire and language, have continuously had these new technologies we create, and then in the creating of them, it recreates what it means to be human.
Sure.
But both the extending of our senses, what's in the floor and the ground, and all those kinds of things that in modernity, I guess we started paying more attention to, often how it happens, but that there's that other shift, I think, that connects to it where, in modernity and then into post-modernity, the kind of shared cultural symbolic narrative of Christendom and things continuously, it becomes more fragile, but it becomes more pluralistic. And so there's kind of a migration of the holy to where those questions that animate human existence around, the good, true, beautiful, justice, all those kinds of things, the capturing of pain and sorrow and joy and such. Yes, and for plenty of people that still exist when they're in the cathedral of sorts. But
sure.
It also still goes on in culture. And I think a lot of institutional religion doesn't have a thick enough account of culture to give it the dignity it demands.
No, I think you're right, because I think what happens, and your point about since fire, I think is really important, because I think we tend to think that technology is some kind of new thing, but we are humans because we have technology. We've always been techno-humans since somebody got two pieces of wood together or whatever they did, But I think with technology, there's this continual, if you like, displacement and replacement of, if you like, the sacred or whatever. It's everything, but you can take something like the sacred and go, well, it gets displaced from its anchored spot, and it gets replaced all over the place. And, the challenge is to acknowledge that and to see the validity of that, within the world, and then sort of consider how that impacts your own self-understanding of all of that stuff. But then how you're going to talk about these things in a world where that is an ongoing process. I mean, there's a wacky uptightness going on over here in England at the moment, because this group of people have started doing these massive silent discos in cathedrals around England. And a certain portion of the church is really upset about this because it's profane.
So is this like where they're all listening to the DJ mix on their headphones?
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
you've got, but they're doing it particularly in cathedrals around Britain, and it's not sponsored by the church. They've just rented these spaces because they wanted to have. I can't remember the name of the group, but they wanted to have basically these sort of, if you like, sacred encounters. Even though the music it's not church music, right? It's like DJ music. People are going there to dance. It's on like a Saturday night. But the fuss is, well, these cathedrals are made for the worship of God, not for dancing. And, but of course, what they don't realize is all of these cathedrals need hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a day to survive, because they have barely any congregations. They've got no real money coming from the church. They've got these massive buildings with huge upkeeps. And it's actually smart capitalism on the part of the cathedral staff to open these spaces up. But what interests me in it is how quickly some people instantly go to this, well, there can be nothing good in this because it's not sanctioned by or isn't within the boundaries or the horizons of how we think people should experience sacred space, even though this group is going, but we want to do this in sacred spaces because we believe there's something special about these Gothic cathedrals that fosters something and nurtures something in people. And now I know for some people that's not theologically robust enough for whatever their particular, agenda is within the world of theology. But I think it tells you something about the culture, the broader culture, which is that there is a hunger for, I call it sort of experiential transcendence. Because I think that's what we've inherited from popular culture, and particularly from pop music. I think the line between the transcendent and the transgressive is a part of the dialogue of pop music, and I think the experiential component is the way that if you go to a concert or something, you experience these euphoric moments, where the hair on your arm stands up, or you feel transported, or whatever. It's not to the transcendent, but it's a sort of transcendent human experience. And I think that's actually one of the dominant sort of experiences that we have in the 21st century as human beings, which is an experience of the transcendent that is outside the boundaries of religious agency or control.
One of the the idea of doing a silent disco in a church just sounds quite awesome, and
yeah, it does really, doesn't it?
Like, I kind of think it would be fun if you were at if you were hosting an event that has people with bad religious trauma, and certain parts of things would be negative for them. What if like you have the option of either dancing around the room to your silent disco, to your EDM, possibly full of the Spirit and or other chemical invitations, and the other half are like doing contemplative prayer or some shit. Where because it's like, well, how do you host this? And then when people's experienced the language of the tradition one way, like maybe it's just being in this space while other people are praying prayers and you're dancing. And for the others, it's like, here's how they can actually join our prayers, because if we start using the language and symbols of our tradition, how they've experienced is so bad. And I feel like there's a youth minister somewhere in England ready to do a lock-in, and it would, and they were bound to get promotion out of this.
Yeah.
Plus, there's that whole bit where what was his name? Robin Dunbar, that ran this project at Oxford, is an anthropologist of religion. Well, he's an anthropologist, did a big religion project the last 6 years. In the book that came out kind of out of it, one of the things he emphasizes is the human beings prior to having language, which language kind of first emerges to help explain transcendent religious experiences. You have kind of trance-like musical rhythmic encounters. The religion before you could ever have words was that. And it's fascinating when you look at the kind of all the different ways, different technologies of culture we invent that get reused and picked up or closed off in the story of religion. Part of Protestant West is really closing off all these spiritual technologies that have been a part of human beings' ongoing lives for millions of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you it's a bit like in some ways like the co-opting of or the appropriation of popular music into the life of the church, in the sort of 60s Jesus culture and stuff, psychedelic music, incidentally, which is another conversation that's worth having. But that kind of has dominated the landscape and been a source of great tension and debate. But really, I think for a lot of people, and it's interesting that the singing happens before the talking, and the talking is regarded as the most important thing. But I think for a lot of people, if nobody talked, they'd be quite happy just singing the whole time. Whereas if everybody was talking the whole time, they'd be, oh, Jesus, let this be over. Where's the donuts?
Yeah. So when, could you kind of tell the story with these kind of questions in mind about the emergence of pop culture? Because one of the naming like the 60s there, that's where you start to see these giant shifts in Western religion. But underneath it involves like these cultural and technological shifts where you got the change of adolescence, the nature of adulthood, the shaping of the family and success and career. Like if you, and where you get to the point, right, that more of culture is the place, the depth questions that have a depth to them get explored than religion. What role do you think that kind of the emergence of pop culture plays in helping us understand the kind of migration of the sacred questions to culture?
Yeah, well, I think after like, going back to that sort of notion of, displacement and replacement in the 20th century is fascinating on so many fronts. But, in the early decade after the Second World War, you had this really strong, particularly in America, because America, while involved in the war, was not affected physically and geographically by the war like Europe was. So Europe was, trashed and had to go through a process of rebuilding. America was pretty flush and went through a process of expansion quite quickly. You know what I mean? But in that first decade of the war, there was very much a sort of, right, let's get back to the American way of life and, just keep going. And you start to see a kind of resistance to that, the builds. And, this is a very brief and generic encapsulation, but you start to see the emergence of resistance to a return to what was and a hunger for something else and something different, which, is attended by, as you said, changes in family structure. Again, a lot of it from the war. You know what I mean? Phyllis always used to talk about, the women that worked in the factories during the war, and then their children, their daughters were the first ones that went to college and all those kind of things. And then you get the emergence of the kind of youth culture and counterculture and particularly in that period of time, music culture that really takes on a kind of trumpet sound, a call to a different world, and it leads to a whole lot of other things that are also going on, the civil rights movement and the emergence of, feminism and things like that, and free love and all of those kind of experimental things that emerge in the post-war years. And then towards the end of the 60s, that begins to have. And what's interesting about that is that in the middle of all of that, while young people are rejecting institutions of all kinds and authority and tradition of all kinds and seeking new things, the one thing that actually doesn't go away is an interest in spirituality, but it's displaced, and it goes in many different directions, not the least of which is more fully towards the East. So you have the Beatles going to India and the whole Maharishi thing and the emergence of all that stuff. But you also get those early images of, that are taken from those Second World War pictures of Jesus by Warner Salmon that were given to all the troops when they went over on that prayer card. You know what I mean? You start to get the emergence of the hippie Jesus and, Jesus, the love revolutionary and stuff like that, who seem to fit in quite well with the mindset of youth culture in certain areas, and then you get this overflow of that back into the church, and you start to see the church, if you like, put it, it's a terrible way to put it, but the church going pop, and rather than being against. I think it probably is still against culture in a lot of spaces, in a lot of ways, but in some ways it opens itself up to difference, at least aesthetic difference. I don't think theological difference. And I think the problem with the Jesus movement is that it got wrapped up very quickly with sort of conservative theological ideas, because the sort of hippies came in through the front door, but they were imparted with ideas. But anyway, I don't know if I'm answering your question or just waffling.
Well, no, because the thing that that I hear you describing there, that was what I was going for, really, is how, like, the post-World War II world shifts so many of our cultural, familial, economic relations. It's all, not only is it free love, it's also the advent of birth control, voting rights for all these kinds of individuals, right? So these institutions that really kind of, after things settled down, post kind of the Protestant compromise to avoid continuous war, start exploding. Both the economic institutions, the notion of the nation states and how we're going to relate, and our economic assumptions, and then religious identity and things was already in flux in a unique way in America. And after World War II, when so many of the denominations ceased having, right, the German services or French services, but they all were moving towards having English services and reorienting around your tradition's theological beliefs rather than cultural markers, right? You can see how that the birth of pop culture and the birth of American expressions of these traditions shape what's being inherited.
Yeah. You also have, at the same time, developments within the church. So you have things like, John Robinson's book, Honest to God, which begins to raise questions. You've got Altizer and that group of people that begin to talk about the death of God. Interestingly, within the church, aimed at transforming the church. So, Altizer teaching as a faithful Presbyterian in his Bible school class, death of God theology, not some aberrant academic notion, but actually a desire to sort of address. So you get the sort of emergence of a new kind of liberal Christianity. You've got the sort of Jesus culture kind of capitalization of the kind of moody Billy Graham evangelicalism stream. You've got the nurturing or the beginnings of conversations about the death of God, and all of those theologies really are after the death of a particular understanding of the nature of the world that begin to reframe and reshape the landscape. And really, the church has essentially had problems since then, because that's, for me, I think, when the traction, the wheels began to spin a little bit in the dirt. But there was enough energy, at least until the 90s, to kind of keep things going for a while. And I think it's like when you come towards, you start to hurtle towards the end of the 20th century and then in the 21st century, and communication technologies accelerate and life accelerates on any number of levels, and we become increasingly more interconnected globally through digitality, that this traction wheel just keeps spinning until it's reached a point now where, well, I don't know what the point is now. It's many points, but a lot of them pointless.
It's spinning so fast, like the rotor in which it spins is just like heated up and probably warping and all sorts of things. You're like, it's actually supposed to touch the ground at some point, and
find some traction.
Yeah,
and of course, it does find. I mean, there are people for whom it all still works, and that's therein lies the rub, because everybody generally tends to go, oh, well, if it's still working for some people, that must mean it's going to work for everybody, rather than, no, you're either lucky or unlucky that it still works for you. I guess that would be a matter of personal preference.
Yeah.
I would say unlucky if you're still holding on to that conception of the sacred, but go ahead, have your time.
Have your time. Do you think, when you think of the shifts that got dialed up in the West experience of COVID and coming out of it, like, were there ones that you anticipated that have gotten bigger? Are there ones you didn't anticipate that you think kind of require more attention? Like, what do you see as the things to learn for kind of the movement of culture, spirit, or whatnot, coming out of COVID and the attempts to reorient existence?
Well, I don't know. This is a really interesting question. I'll name a couple of things that I think are very apparent and very obvious and very key. One is the heightened awareness of anxiety that I think was exacerbated by the sudden stillness and abrupt abbreviation of life during COVID. I think the anxiety that was essentially numbed by consumer capitalism and the sort of 21st century life that never stopped, that allowed people to sort of not freak out. When people were placed in, isolation and or were isolated, I think it became very clear what incredibly deep psychic issues attend most people in the 21st century, on a whole spectrum of levels. And
you mean for the, like, I'm just making sure I understand it, then you can go to the next one. But like, when, for those that weren't essential workers of sorts, there was a forced slowdown and all that, and then all of a sudden you're supposed to turn it back on. The kind of constant acceleration of speed, acquisition, growth, all the elements are kind of, what our economically shaped culture demands. Yeah. It's like, once you took a deep breath and then you're supposed to get back on, it's like, why do I want to go get back in the kiddie pool and start running in circles again? Yeah. Was it a choice? And now I feel like I have to do it and I'm being forced back in it. And so there's this anxiety.
And also along with that, an awareness that our broad way of life generates a level of, I'm English, but B, I think we have sort of existential lack and anxiety at the core of our being. And, we do many things in life to try and compensate for that, and fill it up with all kinds of things. And I think for a lot of people there, that stopping kind of allowed that to sort of rise up in ways that were a little bit overwhelming. And if you think about it, while I'm going to be generous and say that governments did the best that they could, to handle a very complex situation, it occurred to me even at the time that every time everybody went on the television, which they did here every day to give you the reports on, the number of deaths and, this and that and the other, no one ever really fully addressed the emotional impact of this. And even now they talk about the emotional impact of COVID upon kids and stuff like that, but they go, oh, it's terrible. And you know what I mean? And it's terrible. There's very little in the way of like actually addressing it. And so I think that one of the sort of areas where, there's a real lack of traction is between the sort of proclamations of Christian ideology that paper over existential anxiety with the promise of certitude and the infinite, rather than addressing the core ache and anxiety of what life has wrought upon us. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes me think of, it in The Courage to Be, in Tillich's Courage to Be, where he talks about, like Protestantism failing to seize the radical insight of Protestantism.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up, with, after World War II, running around addressing a medieval anxiety.
Yeah.
When what happens when you're addressing the kind of anxiety of guilt and, like moral failure, if the only way you can explain it begins by convincing them there's a God that's loving and holy, but so holy, obviously you're responsible for everything, and it's somehow connected to Adam and Eve, but also you deserve judgment, and you should be scared and shit. And now that I'm going to convince you of all your status as a sinner, I can finally get around to using the symbol of God in some positive way. And he's like, you're missing the time. Like the anxiety coming out of World War II that he names, that I think then made sense for his peers, right? Like kind of like European, lots of art and secular culture and philosophers and that kind of thing, was an anxiety around meaninglessness. And I think that the percentage of people in the West whose engagement religiously is as vapid as those that he was talking to then has grown.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you only have to extrapolate from there and, just add the rest of the 20th century and what's happened in the last 24 years to all of that. And we're still dealing with medieval anxiety. Only now we're turning into feudal societies already. So now we've decided the remedy is to, get the ruling class back and have everybody become serfs and it'll all be okay. And then medieval anxiety will fit nicely. Seems to be the plan.
Oh, when the straight-faced, I was not upset when I said this out loud on a microphone, Davos meeting of, well, eventually we'll get to the point that no one really owns things.
Yeah.
You're like, well, we tried that.
Yeah, we tried that, pal.
Somehow people with their private islands are not the ones I want making those suggestions, Barry.
Yeah, exactly. And their little secret hideaways in New Zealand.
Do you think that the...
I'll tell you my second point in a second, but I still won't forget that because I think the other ones are good too. But go ahead.
Oh, no, well then go ahead and go to the second one.
Well, no, it's a tangent. So say what you're going to say.
Oh, but just in the way anxiety, how the anxiety changes in culture, right? Underneath that, should someone want to steward the symbolic inheritance of a tradition, right, then it would mean actually taking seriously what's happening in culture to see the way questions are being raised and understanding what's going on. And I think that there's oftentimes I experience a level of resistance among the very people who are anxious their tradition's not working to learning to listen well to what kind of questions, challenges, and fears people have. And I think that like when institutions select for the people most fearful of listening well, then that's how you get ones that are like increasingly distrusted, fragile, and not compelling if you aren't fully on board in some deep way.
No, it's true, and I think that there are always there's the two sorts of anxiety as well, isn't there? There's the sort of the general anxiety of being human that's common probably to everyone in some way or another, and then there are the particularities of everybody's individual sort of thrownness into the world and how that plays out and what that brings to us. You know what I mean? And how we address those things. And both those things have to be listened to, I think, and spoken to. And it's interesting that you use the word, the person anxious about their traditions, because that anxiety runs deep.
Well,
on top of existential anxiety, I've got my own, denominational anxiety or whatever it is, my non-denominational anxiety.
Well, because until it,
my deconstructionist anxiety now. Got to get there.
The one of the things that I found, even the way Tillich puts it back towards the church is he goes, if you're so concerned about your tradition or your denomination or whatever, then you've just never had the courage to be a self. Because part of being a part of something, if for the one with faith or the courage to be and such, is the courage to be a self and the courage to be a part of something. And if the criticism, judgment, or perceived or interpreted failures of your tradition is really a judgment and failure of yourself, then wake up. You're outsourcing your selfhood to a collective that you can't even control.
Absolutely, and to that I would add that I think another one of the areas where we've lost traction is in the kind of universalized static nature and understanding of the self that Christianity tends to propagate, which I think has very little resonance in a world where people sort of understand the multiplicity of what it means to be human and the transformative way that, or the ways in which we change ourselves through our lives. You know what I mean? And again, I think when we sort of appeal to this, this idea of the whole true self that lurks deep down inside you somewhere that Jesus wants to bring out, it's rooted in too much ancient understanding. And that, not to dismiss that, but ancient understanding can use a little help at times when it comes to how we sort of develop some things.
Yeah. One of the ways in later in his life that Tillich addressed that was shifting an understanding that he thought had substantialized the notion of the self, where there's some pure essence you're either living into, or like, oh, you're made in the image of God, and there's like a version of you or whatever. Was to shift that the dignity of being made in the image of God is to be a part of a species that is addressed. The human being is the one whose question of its own identity is something it gets to enact moment to moment, should it move beyond like the claims the collective, the social, the cultural make upon you. And then he's like, and the places you see these questions being raised in the deepest ways are very often outside the context of religious traditions, where they only know how to ask the question that the self demanded at its origin story, right?
Exactly.
So like, oh, we can tell Luther's version of it, or we could do Calvin or Zwingli, or it really like this big thing emerges with Augustine all the way back when you get like the development of the interiority and such. And I find that it helpful that the shift of like the dignity of the human is the one that exists as addressed. And you've always already embarked. So, you
get to it.
But you had a second point a minute ago.
Oh yeah. Oh, well, and I realized that it's kind of it's an observation, and it also does connect a little bit with anxiety, and that is in the last decade, but particularly since COVID, the acceleration of interest, fascination, and experimentation with psychedelics. Which, I mean, I hate to say that homebrewed Christianity is going to be eclipsed by something, but you might want to think about home shroomed Christianity, because my feeling is that I think it's probably already happening on the DL, but I do think that the kind of experimentation, the and it's interesting because the recovery of interest in psychedelics is a bit like the return of God. It's never a return to the same God. So, the God of microdosing and ayahuasca journeys and mushrooms is to address, yes, existential yearnings like the 60s, but principally to deal with anxiety and depression and the concerns of the immediacy of the emptiness of 21st century living. But I do think that also, it's really funny actually. This morning, in my journal, I don't know why, I made this little schema.
Oh, cool.
And it's the sort of history of psychedelic drugs. I don't know why it just occurred to me, but the way in which it sort of moved through the ages and where it's at now, in this kind of, I don't know, psychedelic renaissance or whatever, which I think tells you so much about what might be going on with, not, of course, never with everybody, but when something sort of breaks through the top layer of culture and breaks out into, newspaper articles and so on and so forth start to get, and, hospitals start to get, government position, permission to experiment with LSD or whatever. It tells you that it's addressing something that is felt to be not being addressed by what already exists. You know what I mean? So I think, psychedelics has a lot to do with a resistance to big pharma. And I think that in some ways is the post-COVID reaction is like, well, these, especially with mushrooms and things like that, the supposedly natural, psychedelics and things like that. But also there's no doubt. And, I have a couple of friends who, work with shamans, and one who sort of claims to be a shaman. You know what I mean? They take people on journeys and they do all this stuff. And there's also no doubt that there is this, yearning also encapsulated that the people are trying to, address. And it reminds me that in one of the, oh my God.
Watch out.
Barry frickin' Taylor.
I don't even know.
A seer.
I don't even know what to say. Right?
A seer.
But I just want to just comment that a pair of red glasses just busted into my universe.
Yes.
in a kind of almost psychedelic manner.
Barry was reflecting on the growth of psychedelics.
Ah. Yeah, baby.
All right.
Well, listen, this is what I worked up for you. Because I thought I would want to introduce you properly. So here's what I came up with.
This feels like a psychedelic moment, actually.
A seer in the age of the secular, the minister of the mimetic, prophet to the postmodern, the reverend of rock. What have you two bogans been talking about?
Obviously nothing of importance.
Well, I just feel like we're going to have to cut that out and stick it at the beginning there, Barry. I don't want, I can't even have a voice that deep, let alone.
That was mad. Was that planned?
Well, I told him I was talking to you, and he said, hey, I might pop on at the end and surprise him.
Oh,
that was as far as it got.
Wow.
And I just said, okay.
And then I got my Elton John.
You certainly did. You're just a rocket man.
I'm not the man I think I am at home. I'll tell you that.
So, to finish the drugs.
Finish the drugs?
Because now people are probably thinking, am I on drugs? Because Bo all of a sudden showed up in the middle of this.
I feel like I just had a little, ecstatic, euphoric invasion of the body snatchers.
The you make joking about, oh, you might need to have home shroom Christianity. Like if downloads count, like when Merlin Sheldrake was on and Rupert Sheldrake, or when Sarah Lane Ritchie's talked about psychedelics and religion research and all that kind of stuff, the downloads and shares privately go up dramatically. In April, I'm doing a kind of process relational preaching conference in Denver, and there are multiple ministers going that are from states, where it's now legal, that are like, can you do a session or something on what you do as clergy to like give whatever like the appropriate advice is, kind of like how to do sex ed without purity culture, but for mushrooms. And then like any chance you could get someone there to host first timers. And I was like, whoa, I don't know about that last part, but so I don't know how that insurance policy works. Like I know what an insurance policy for day drinking in a church looks like, but a bunch of ministers first shrooming, I don't know.
Oh my God. What was I going to say? I remember it must have been early 90s. I was at this conference at Durham University in the sort of theology communication thing. And there was a guy that I know there by the name of Rupert Till. And Rupert Till was one of the people involved in the 9 o'clock service, which I think was probably the first inkling of truly experimental, I don't know, sort of emergent, alternative worship. And it all went tits up as things do, power, lust, control, all of that stuff. But Rupert Till's talk, because the interesting thing about the 9 o'clock service was that it sort of came to be at the height of rave culture in Britain. And it was called the 9 o'clock service because it was held at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night in the crypt of a church in Sheffield. And it was called a rave mass. And it's where Matthew Fox got his notion for the cosmic mass from. But Rupert gave a very volatile talk at that clergy theological conference about the role of drugs in theological discourse. And that was 30 years ago. So the conversation needs to be had. And it's worth remembering that the beginnings of Jesus culture Christianity and the forms of Christianity that most of us grew up with came directly out of the psychedelic end of pop culture. So the psychedelic thread is, and I'm not advocating, everybody dropping acid and tuning in and dropping out. I'm just saying that within this post-COVID renaissance of interest in altered consciousness, there are many points, I think, of pertinent theological discourse to be had about what is being sought, what is being addressed, and what is being chased after by people. And it might just be that there are some really interesting theological discussion points about the nature of one's relationship to oneself and to others and to the world that, I don't know. That was my little rap. Man.
What would you two think about Jethro Tull and the 9 o'clock service being the name of a tribute band we've been thinking about putting together?
Jethro Tull. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Jethro Tull in the 9 o'clock service.
You have to open and close every show with a Jethro Tull song? Is that the...
Yeah. But someone's got to stand on one leg with a flute.
We're going to have to get another...
I caught it.
Can you stand on one leg with a flute for 5 mintes, Bo? Or if it's later in the concert after the shrooms go in, it might be 13 minutes.
Yeah, really. I mean, I could do a tree pose, so it's just a question of this bit, But it's amazing how quickly things descend into chaos.
Do you I have a student in my theology and culture class that is writing a paper on Taylor Swift and the Eras tour, and and there's been multiple versions of it, but now is looking at different narratives where people told it online of like getting the tickets, going to the show as pilgrimage.
Yeah.
But not that you have to talk about that, but I'm just interested in the kind of ubiquity of kind of post-COVID Taylor Swift experience, travel to, reliving in the film. Like,
yeah, I mean, I firstly, I would say that notion of the concert pilgrimage is nothing new, and it has a long history. I mean, Deadheads.
Oh yeah,
Deadheads in the 60s. I mean, there are still Deadheads going to Grateful Dead conference, and they don't tour anymore. I mean, the Deadheads sort of started, the outside concert parties and the socializing and the community and stuff like that. The Taylor Swift phenomenon is a fascinating one, because I think she's probably the social media manifestation of pop culture fame. And it comes with some very interesting and perhaps novel dynamics and characteristics to us, although at its core, it's still ultimately the kind of reverential, religious, ritualized, performative thing that happens within popular music and popular culture in a post-God world, where those impulses for those kind of experiences get laid on external things that have no apparent connection to a sense of the sacred and stuff like that. Personally, I think it's. I've been thinking a lot. I was going to say I've been thinking a lot about Taylor Swift, but I actually haven't been thinking a lot about Taylor Swift at all. I mean, it's sort of beyond me on some levels, but because I don't resonate. But for all the Taylor haters out there, sorry, I'm not Taylor lovers, but I do think that there's a lot to look at in that stuff, like there is in all of these big things that occur within culture that have impact. The mediated, disseminated, this must be important and it needs to be important to you stories that sort of get channeled through the various media stuff.
Yeah.
What she ought to do is Taylor Swift and radical theology. There you go.
Oh. Well, is the now you're a part of a radical theology graduate program, and you want to say a bit about that. Now, we've been talking about radical theology, but without saying radical theology the whole time. To me, you might want to say something if people don't know about it, but kind of how the conversation we've been having is connected to what you're up to and where to find you.
I don't know what much needs to be said about radical theology. Ultimately, theology after the death of God in various forms and iterations, and a largely non-orthodox, non-confessional view or views of theology and Christianity. But I put together a fully accredited master's in radical theology for a group called GCAS, the Global Center for Advanced Studies, which was started, Creston Davis, right? So Creston started that about 10 or 12 years ago, and it spent much of the last probably 7 or 8 years really focused on continental philosophy and psychoanalysis. And so this program is kind of a theological degree that sort of looks at the intersections of theology, philosophy, and psychoanalysis in an attempt to grapple with the 21st century. But it's a really great opportunity. It's a 1-year program and it's cheap, which is not its selling point, but that is something to take into consideration. And it's kind of geared up to a sort of individual, like what you want to study is what will help you, the questions that you want to answer. But it's, and there's a lot of different people potentially available to contribute. Caputo's around, Jameson Webster, psychoanalysis, going to do some stuff. Catherine Malibu, I think, a lot of there's people out there, but it's more about, I'm trying to put together a cohort of people to sort of go through it together, but but separately. So I've been doing that. And, so GCAS.ie is where you can find out about it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was a promotion from me. How about that?
Oh, of all the promotions you've done, and I can't remember the other.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the
most.
best.
That was the most. That was about
your
as good
hard
as
sell is really overwhelming.
Yeah, well, you know how good I am at the hard sell.
Well, all right. So I have one more question, Bo, and then you can ask something. Oh,
I was going to say when I think elevator speech, I think Barry Taylor.
Is he on one leg with a pan flute?
What's your
well,
question?
This one is purely selfish. We were when we were texting earlier, I joked about having a dream where we were tasked with putting on a film festival, and all my suggestions are things I watched with a teenage boy or Bluey, and you were very disturbed, and you listed off like, well, you haven't seen, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, I don't know. So when you think of, if I was going to as an adult, go watch a film, more recent ones, like, are there any that come to mind where, you're helping me curate those random times? I have 2 hours where I'm neither working nor parenting.
Right now, I think you should go and see Poor Things, which is a film. And I won't pronounce the guy's name correctly. So, but he directed The Lobster and The Favorite. And this is his latest film. And essentially it's kind of, a sort of Frankenstein tale about a woman who, because of a set of circumstances, has no filter, no guilt, and no shame around her womanhood. It's a brilliant film, I think. And Killers of the Flower Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Vastly underrated Scorsese film. And, I don't know. I haven't actually, since I've been here in Britain, I had a long spell where cinema was not doing it for me. Except when I was having arguments with Gareth Higgins about why I didn't like this movie or that movie and why I was wrong. Because Gareth.
Oh, yeah. But he has strong film opinions.
Yeah, and he's really good with film, so I appreciate his input. But
I think people would probably just appreciate listening to it just because y'all have like cool different accents, and your inflection just has the like using the accent to make it just feel overwhelmingly confident, that then you're like, well, what's happening? They disagree. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we just disagree, and really, I just disagree to wind him up, because that's what you should do always. Just disagree so you can wind people up. By the way, speaking of interesting accents, and this is a tip for anybody. Have you follow on Instagram the feed? I think it's Questions for the Anxious Mind.
Mm-mm.
I think that's the guy's name. It's Meditations for the Anxious Mind. Is this Irish guy that kind of addresses contemporary issues in a rather brilliant way. And if you want to waste 5 minutes in the morning getting your head right, that would be great. And while I know you have like a very, very important, theological podcast, I trust that you do listen to the Blind Boy podcast.
The Blind Boy? No.
Oh my God. He's another Irish guy who is self-admittedly on the spectrum autistic, I think, and was in a novelty Irish rap group in which he performed with a shopping bag over his head, and to this day continues to wear that said shopping bag. And his podcast is magical Irish storytelling.
Do you hear the rustling of the bag the whole time?
No, because it's sort of flattened to his head. It's like one of those plastic shopping bags.
Oh, okay.
It's brilliant. Yeah, it's kind of great with the eyes cut out. It's fantastic. Oh no, you will dig it. It's like, it just takes you away on the wings of like made up stories. There, you're welcome. So there's two things to change your life. Forget all the theological shit. That was the most important thing. The three things: join my MA program, listen to Meditations for the Anxious Mind, and tune into the Blind Boy podcast. And of course, always listen to David Bowie and Nick Cave. And Taylor Swift, of course.
And Taylor Swift, of course.
Because I don't want any haters.
All right, Bill, you get the last question since you joined the psychedelic trip after you don't even know what we've talked about. So
I don't.
Yeah, but
I'm coming in.
Wearing those glasses, he can see backwards.
I was going to say, I'm coming into this like the blind boy. I just, actually wanted to, Barry, the last time the three of us were together, in my recollection, was in Tripp's backyard. We were doing a show and you were going to unveil the 10 albums of the year. Does this sound familiar at all?
We've done this before.
Well, I'm sure we've done it before, but I don't know. I don't remember what those 10 were. I know the Counting Crows weren't in there though.
I remember one of them was. I just remember that was when you told me about Gary Clark Jr.
I downloaded it that night.
You're welcome.
But thank you.
Have you heard his new album?
And
have you heard his new album?
No.
Come on, boys.
This is where I was going. Wait. So Tripp's out doing the intro, and you and I are standing in his living room behind the sliding glass door, and you asked me if there was anything like I wanted to throw out. And we're living in LA at the time. It's the closest to hip I've ever been. I'm not a hip guy. And I actually had something to contribute, and so I threw out an album by the group is called the XX, I think. And you turned to me and said, "Bo, grow up." and then Flynn opened the door, and we walked out to do the podcast.
I'm so sorry, Bo.
No, you were right. And I think about it every time that I try to listen to music and it doesn't go well. And I just think I need to grow up. My musical taste needs to grow up. All of that is to ask, what should I be listening to?
Wow.
And so Gary Clark's new album. Yeah.
That's pretty good. What have I been listening to of late? Do you know who Pelvis Wrestling is? Oh,
no.
You're going to thank me for this. Pelvis Wrestling is a queer Austin-based indie pop country singer who just brought an album out called Andy or the Four Horse Girls of the Apocalypse.
Sounds great.
It's great. That's worth a listen. The new album from Idols is great, called Tang.
Oh, I love Idols.
The new album's a slight departure, but worth a listen.
Okay. I could tell that they were going to go in a different direction.
Yeah,
I saw an interview with,
they got a promoter, a new producer that slicked them up, but not in a bad way. You know what's a great album? What Now by Brittany Howard. You know Brittany Howard from the Alabama Shakes? Yeah, her new album is quite beautiful. And what else? I don't know. I've been on a little bit of a Where have I been going lately? Yeah, that'll do, maybe for now. I've been listening to a bit of obscure stuff lately, so it could be, yeah, that'll do you. And anytime you don't know what to do, just put on David Bowie, any album, anytime, and you're sorted. And with those glasses, I would go for his late 70s period, but
all right. Duly noted.
Ground control to Major Bo.
Both row toll. That would be the
both row toll. And the 4 horse girls of the apocalypse.
Yes. All right. Last one.
Yeah.
Pete Rollins, Gareth Higgins, Kester Bruin. Quote, marry, kill.
Yeah. Quote, marry.
Which one would you quote? Which one would you marry? Which one did you kill?
I'd quote Kester.
Yeah, I knew you knew it with Kester.
I'd marry Gareth, kill Pete. Because Pete's already dead. Well, I mean, that's his theological grid, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oddly,
undead.
all 3 of them would probably appreciate the category you put them in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Kester, has just got a new book coming out.
I read the first half of it.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. So,
all right, here's another funny story. One day, Barry, you and I are driving. I met you at that church in Pasadena, the beautiful, was it All Saints?
Yeah.
And we were going to drive up to Fuller for a book group, actually. We were reading The Faith of the Faithless, I think, by
Critchley.
Critchley, yeah. And we were going to drive up to Pasadena coffee shop. And somebody else was with us. I don't remember who. And I had just heard an interview that morning on like a radio show or something with Kester Bruin. And I was fascinated with this stuff. And I asked the 2 of you, do you guys have any frame of reference? Do you know that, like, who this person is? And you just stared at me and you go, are you kidding right now? But I wasn't. I actually didn't know you were connected to him. It was a genuine question.
So,
and you were like,
Bo, I think I need to apologize for being abusive to you over the years because I told you to grow up and ask if you're kidding. So I think perhaps I need to sort of really weigh up the way I've treated you over the years, and perhaps perhaps I'm the one that needs to grow up.
No, in fairness, it is always when I'm underperforming, if I can just be honest. So the third time is you called me out in front of my exam committee when I was doing qualifying exams, because I had taken the 5 qualifying exams in like 3 days. My brain was mush. And I had to press out 1 more page, and I only had I think 15 minutes to do it. And I just couldn't think of anything. And so I reverted and quoted Jihad versus McWorld. And you called me out in front of my exam committee, and they were like, yeah, we were a little disappointed in that citation.
Well, everybody that knows me knows that, I'm a very, very tough reader of things.
One time Barry and I were teaching a cultural exegesis class, and for the final, during the class, they had to read like a post-structuralist and religion survey type book, Heidegger's Being and Time, Marshall McLuhan's like a collection of essays.
Oh my gosh.
I think with Charles Taylor. So when something like that, right? And so we tell them, just bring your notes from the readings, and we're going to just do an essay in class. That way you don't have to have a long paper, right? And Barry he's like, we're going to show the short film and let them demonstrate mastery of these theories, responding to this film. What was this film? It was like the film about absolutely nothing. It was like a 7-minute weird film that like the filmmaker was trying to make a film about nothing. And
no idea.
It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. And then they were just supposed to interpret it using the text from the class. And we came back 2 hours later, like we walked down to the pier, had a drink, come back in, and then we let them talk to each other for a bit. And Barry's like, well, I think that's good. I think you've all done good. And they didn't realize till like we were done that it was a film about nothing. And we had no idea how all the stuff in the books was related to this film. but it forced him to like use the tools in this space. And he's like, well, since the filmmaker, so it was about nothing. Anything you found there would have been something. Would have been something. And the faces of the students. One of my favorite moments in the classroom. Nathan brings it up to me at least once a year. He's like, do you remember that time we sit there and I'm trying to think if I understand Heidegger or not? And then you and Barry come back clearly drinking and go. The film was about nothing.
You may have been clearly drinking, but Well,
you were clearly with me.
Exactly.
Guilty by association. That's the name of Tripp and I's tribute band.
That's the tribute band for Both Row Toll. Like when all the original members aren't there, when the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse can't go on tour, then we tour as Guilty by Association.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, thanks for letting me pop in here. This has been a real joy.
It's such a pleasant surprise. And
what if he wasn't wearing those glasses?
Yeah, well, this is true. I mean, I don't know. It wouldn't be wouldn't be the same thrill, would it?
No.
I don't think it would. And just a purely aesthetic question. Are those your regular glasses?
They're not irregular.
Oh, I don't know.
I have several pairs.
Great. I think the bold glasses are always a good choice, mate. Don't worry about it. I'm complimenting you on your ocular choice.
Thank you. My policy is whatever distracts from my receding hairline.
You're talking to a man with an elevator forehead, so
Well, that's why you grew it out, right? That's why you grew your hair out.
No, not really. No, I was going for I'm going for the Jesus look, obviously. I'm bringing back. No, I don't know. Boredom. It's really weird. I'll tell you something really weird. So a while ago, somebody sent me a picture of me when I was about 17. And the day I got this picture on my phone, I was wearing a t-shirt, denim overalls, and I had hair like this. And in this picture, when I was 19, I was wearing a t-shirt, denim overalls, and I had hair this long. And I'm like, fuck me. I just went through, blue hair, purple hair, spiky hair, short hair, long hair, mullet, the whole deal. And now I'm back here. So maybe it's just, as I move ever closer to the end point, I don't know, whatever, it might change.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Apparently so. Apparently, and that was me thinking that I was being trendy.
Well, this has been fun, Barry.
It has been.
And I had no idea if the arrival of Bo would lead to post-rapture disaster or a psychedelic trip to the eschatological banquet. So I'm glad.
Well, with your sort of purple blue light behind you and Bo's red glasses, I mean, I'm feeling somewhat lent towards and drawn towards the spiral of the dynamics of the lysergic experience.
Well,
I'm just going to go ride. I'm just going to get on my bicycle diary and go for a ride.